Cyclists often resort to extreme measures in order to eke every last little bit of performance out of their equipment. And today I'm going to show you an example of that. If you're racing a do or die hill climb or a time trial or a short race that is really important and you really want to win, then I'm going to show you a modification today that is free, is something that pros have been doing for years and will make your bike faster. We're talking about removing the seals and the thick grease inside your bearings and running them without seals and with a lighter or thinner lubricant. This will reduce the friction in the bearing and it will allow them to spin more freely. But be warned, the seals and also the thick heavy grease are there to prevent water ingress and also dirt getting in the bearing. And by removing them, you're going to severely reduce the operational life of your bearing. I've seen this done in national hill climb winning bikes, by pros in time trials at Grand Tours, and by amateurs competing in races where just every single watt counts, where the winning margin can often be just a second. If that sounds like something that you're going to be doing, then this could be for you. If you're just cruising to the cafe with your mates, I probably wouldn't recommend it. The basic premise is that you remove the cartridge bearing seal, you can see here, which then exposes the individual ball bearings underneath. These are often encased in a thick grease to protect them, but you remove that grease and then you replace it with a much more free-flowing, less viscous, lighter mineral oil. Sewing machine oil has been used before by pro riders, and in my case I'm going to use this ludicrous AF lube, which is much lighter than the grease that's in the bearing. This seal helps keep dirt and water out of the bearing, but it does add a significant amount of friction to the bearing's operation. Also, the thick grease inside adds friction. That can be reduced by switching to a lower viscosity, freer flowing lube, but the majority of the friction that's created in the bearing does come from the seal. I'm just giving a quick overview at the moment. I'm going to go through this and do it, but one thing to point out is when you reapply some lighter lube to the cartridge bearing, you don't need much. Friction Facts has done an extensive study into this and they reckon that just a single drop is sufficient. If you add 5 drops of lube, which doesn't seem like much, it can cause a phenomenon known as churning, where the individual ball bearings start sliding against the race, the carrier that holds them inside the cartridge, and this creates greater friction overall within the bearing. Using too much lube is no good for anyone. The amount you can save is going to depend on a whole host of variables. So the kind of bearings that you're using, the size of the bearings, the kind of mineral oil or light lubricant that you replace the grease with that was in there previously, and also the bearings that you do. So ideally I would suggest doing both the wheels, the bottom bracket, and you could also do the jockey wheels too. Friction Facts has investigated this and they reckon that you're looking at somewhere within the range of 1 to 2.5 watts. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but if we put that into the context of a sort of, a decent road cyclist averaging 250 watts for a 40-kilometer ride, then you're looking at 6 seconds saved, more or less. So that's for a single watt, so it could be more. You can decide for yourself whether or not that is important or significant to you. You can look at it this way though, it's significantly cheaper than switching out to fancy pants ceramic bearings and oversized pulley wheel systems for a similar saving that doesn't cost you anything. But just bear in mind, if your chosen event is going to be in wet or dirty conditions, don't do it. If you were eking out maximum gains, then you do this to both your bottom bracket bearings, your wheel bearings, and also, in theory, your jockey wheel bearings too. However, for the purposes of just demonstrating and showing you the procedure of how to do it, I'm just going to do it on the bottom bracket bearings here today. And the first step is to remove the chain set. And this will differ depending on the chain set you have, and we have separate dedicated videos telling you how to remove chain sets and install them. So I'm just going to quickly do that now. Before I do though, you can see that this chain set doesn't spin anywhere near as freely as they can do. And that's in part down to the fact that it is a bit old. It's not the newest on this one. And also it's just got some quite tough seals on it and thick grease in it for winter. A quick note is that you can't do this on all bearings. For example, this is a Shimano bottom bracket. They're pretty common, but it's not designed to be serviceable. So instead of the rubber seal, you have this plastic cover. Now, it's very difficult to remove this plastic cover without cracking it and damaging it so that you can't actually put it back in place. Consequently, if you've got a bottom bracket like this, it's not a procedure that I'd recommend you do. The one that I'm going to show you today and I'm working on is an FSA bottom bracket. It's inexpensive and is fairly sort of common. You can see it's got that seal over the cartridge bearing here. Now, with the bottom bracket removed, one of the first things that you should do is just check the status of the bearing. You can run your finger inside of it and just feel if there's any play and also if it's grainy. If it's grainy, then it needs servicing regardless, or it might even need replacing. And if there's play in it as well, it probably needs replacing. But this one's pretty good. If your bearing is knackered and it's got play in it, then don't worry, because for the purposes of this video, it's actually pretty good. A damaged bearing is perfect to practice on in removing the seals, because when you come to remove the seals, you don't want to damage them. To remove the seal, you can use a knife, or I'm going to use this Park Tool pick. Again, just really need to stress, be careful. You don't want to damage the seal. I'm just going to pick away at the edge of it. And in there you can see the individual bearings, and you can see the race, and then there's thick grease in there as well. Look, you can see that. I can pick the grease out. Real thick stuff. Look at that. With the bearing seals removed, you could just run them like that and experience a slight saving, because the majority of the friction, as mentioned, comes from the seal. But if a job is worth doing, it's worth doing properly, so we're going to degrease them and remove the thick grease out of the bearing as well. And to do that, we're going to give them a bath in an ultrasonic cleaner, or sonicator in chemistry land. But don't worry if you don't have one of these, because you can just simply use a jar and shake it with solvent in, with the part in, and clean it that way. You just have to do it and rinse a couple of times. My favourite solvent to do this would actually be acetone. That's because of chemistry. And one of the most cited papers in the world says that that's the best solvent to use when cleaning laboratory apparatus. If you disagree with me, then let me know in the comments section below. Just bear in mind you're also disagreeing with Nobel laureates the world over. To remove the bearings from your bike, you're going to want to use a bearing removal tool. They look like this from Park. You simply slide it in reverse, and then the splines contract and then expand, so that then you can then push against the other side of the bearing by hitting it with a hammer. So here the bearings are inside these cups. Sometimes the bearings are pressed into the actual frame. If the cups are like this, removable cups that go into a threaded bottom bracket like I have on the Pinarello, you could in theory just leave the cups in place as I've done here, or you could remove them and take the bearings out. It's up to you. I've left the cups in place, see no reason to do it. You can get good access to them and clean them afterwards. What you can't do though is just try and bodge it by leaving the bearing in the cup and then just trying to do it from one side. And that's because both sides of the bearing have seals. So you're going to want to remove both those seals and not just the one that you can see. Right, I've got some biodegradable degreaser. That's in the ultrasonic cleaner. Let's turn it on, put the bearings in. They've been in there about 10 minutes now, and just looking at them, I can't see any grease around the race anymore. So I'm going to turn that off and take them out. I can see now that all the grease is out of the bearing. You can see the race, and now you can see all the gaps in between it that were filled with grease before. And what the next step is to just give this another wash. So what I'm going to do is wash it with a bit of water, and then you'd use either some acetone or some petrol or something like that, that's then just going to remove the final impurities that are aqueous, and then the final impurities that are organic, so any other bits of grease that's in there. It's really important that you dry your bearings though after you've washed them and cleaned them out. To do this, you can use an air compressor, which just blasts them with air, dries them out really quick. Most people don't own those, so in that case you can use a radiator, just leave it on top for a while and dry it out. Although if you live in the UK, you probably can't afford to turn your radiator on, in which case you can use a bowl of rice. It's just not the best method if you're in a hurry. Or how about this for a hack? The hand dryers at GCN Megabase. Having degreased and dried the bearings, I'm now going to apply some lube. I'm going to use this Muck Off Ludicrous AF because it's significantly freer flowing and much less viscous than the thick grease that you normally get in there. And I'm only going to apply, as mentioned, just one drop, or maybe two, in here, as per a Friction Facts investigation that suggested that that was the sort of optimum amount. Use it very sparingly. You can, of course, use your lube of choice, or you can use something that's not necessarily designed for bikes. So sewing machine oil is something that I have on good authority has been used in Vincenzo Nibali's bikes for years. Right, let's do it. I just want to show you a quick, before I do the second bearing, I just want to do a quick before and after. So if you listen to this, this is the sound the bearing makes when it's completely dry. I'm going to spin it. Hear that? I'll put it near my microphone. Okay, right. I'm going to put in one drop of the Ludicrous Lube. It's amazing how just one drop just spreads around all the bearings, and so now it's quiet. Let's put it near my mic. Can't hear it. I'm now going to put the bearings back into the bike behind me, into their cups, and I'm going to use a bearing press to do that. When you do that job, always use a bearing press. If you don't use a bearing press and just ham fist them in, you'll probably damage the bearings. But then on this particular bottom bracket, and this is something that's found on others too, there are also these bearing covers which go over the top of the bearing. They have a dual purpose, as they also act as a washer. Now, we can't run the bottom bracket without these washers in place. It won't work. So you have to install them, and these create friction. But what you can do to reduce that friction is actually just remove the rubber lip that's on the edge of these seals and just keep the metal part in the middle as a washer. So to do that, I'm just going to bodge it off with either a knife or a pair of scissors. I think I've only got a pair of scissors behind me, so I'm going to use that. To reinstall the bearings, I'm going to use a bottom bracket bearing press. I'd highly recommend using a dedicated tool like this, because if you try and ham fist it and just wang them in with a massive hammer, you'll probably knacker your bearings. I just, absolutely don't recommend using anything but a press to install bearings into a bike. You could damage your bike as well. I'm just going to install the chain set and the bearing cover washers. So there you have it, an extreme modification for a slight gain. It's not for everyone, but it is something that top riders have been doing to win the world's biggest bike races for many, many years, and I'm sure they'll probably continue to do it in the future. Let us know your thoughts about it in the comments section down below. Share it with your friends if you've got any, and well, I hope you found this interesting. I'll see you in the next one. Love you, bye.